Matt's comments on Ukraine yesterday were interesting, and I'm curious to hear more. Matt, were you just saying that you're okay with a peace agreement where Ukraine cedes land if that's what they want? That is, the U.S. shouldn't pressure them to keep fighting if they're willing to give up land, stop the fighting? Or that even if the Ukrainian people want to keep fighting and not give up any territory, that you'd be supportive of the West trying to coerce them to take a deal that requires giving up territory to avoid escalation? If it's the former, I agree. If it's the latter, appeasement isn't the best strategy. What's the context of this? Because I know that there was, I saw a piece, I think it was in The Nation, I can't remember who wrote it, about the idea of the U.S. should tie some of its military aid or all of its military aid to at least attempts to negotiate.
Yeah, I mean, I was responding to like people calling Chomsky a tanky for saying like we should keep the door open for negotiation, not because we trust Putin, but because escalation and war would be bad. And people responding saying, well, if Putin gets any sort of territory out of this, it'll set a bad precedent. And I'll just say, like, I'm not, that sort of setting precedent game, I don't really think exists. I think if America wants to set precedents, it could do a lot to account for its actions in invading countries, as opposed to just continuing to fund military engagement. And like I fully understand like Ukrainians who want to fight Russia, but I also think like if it's dependent upon our military resources, like we have to have some sort of say. And I don't see a whole lot of agitation at the highest levels for some kind of peace outcome.
Well, what's the incentive there? Because I mean, there's a financial incentive for certain military industrial complex types to keep funding this stuff, and there are people within the halls of government that feel like this is a good opportunity to weaken Vladimir Putin, and so it has to come from just an underlying desire for peace as opposed to these other factors.
Yeah, and that's all my concern is. Like, I understand like Russia's the aggressor here, and I respect anybody who's fighting invaders like that, but I also think like the concept of you have to think about diplomacy. That's the only way wars end. And yeah. I don't think I just think there's a lot of jingoism and a lot of shouting people down who are calling for things as unrealistic, and I don't really buy that.
I mean, I think more or less agree with you, although I do think that there seems to be no doubt that Putin saw the West's reaction to Crimea and to the Donbass region and felt like, in addition to being incorrect as to what was going to happen militarily, I think he thought this is going to weaken. It's going to weaken NATO. I think he thought that the West's reaction is going to be just to be fine. And frankly, I think so I'm not convinced that it wouldn't have been, but for the fact that a combination of Ukraine fought back harder than Russia thought, and Russia didn't have the capacity it thought it had. And had they gotten control of Kyiv in within 3 days, had they successfully assassinated or gotten Zelensky out of the country within 3 or 4 days, I don't think there would be any massive reaction from the West. Frankly, I think they would have. I think it would have been over. I mean, I think that was the calculation. But at one point, I think those people who wanted to weaken Putin and those folks who were afraid of Russian aggression said this is an opportunity. And so it's very complicated, but I think there is no world in which we should be funding a war without an expectation that there is at least legitimate attempts to negotiate. And frankly, my sense is there's not a partner for negotiations on the other side. There's been no indications that Putin's willing to do that. But I think it is important that we continue to encourage it, at least if we're going to give money.
I agree. And I think, I just think that Chomsky being old as time, and also having written about NATO expansion and it being insanely obsolete. And granted, he was doing this before it became kind of a weirdo, tanky, enemy of my enemy is my friend, line. I'm like, give him a pass. Like this dude's been like talking about NATO for a very, very long time. And I think he has every right to still be mad at what's going on. But I think you're totally right that the question is, it's like, how do you not get to this point where you just like Putin is allowed to do anything, but also not ramp up a military body like NATO? And the answer is diplomacy, but we don't elevate those folks in our national security administrations and apparatuses.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a tough question because
I don't I agree with that emphasis on like there's not a negotiating partner. But my problem is when reports come out and saying, oh, we offered to give assurances about NATO, and people are like, wait, we should have never done that, because like to me we're speaking like jingos.
That a landline, Francesca? Oh, that's you, Sam.
Yeah. Papa Woody. Oh, jeez. Papa Woody. Ethan and Hassan had a Liver King on leftovers yesterday. I don't know any of that, what that means. Given how both of them have spent countless hours rightfully bashing Joe Rogan for having anti-science guests and putting up zero resistance, it was disappointing to see them sit there and let him spew his BS tenets with no pushback. I don't... Ethan and okay, I know.
Yeah, Ethan Klein and Hassan,
right?
But
who's Liver King?
do you want me to tell you, Sam?
No. Is Francesca aware of the Italiophobia that occurred here yesterday?
No, I'm not. Please fill me in. Anti-Italianism?
We did some accents.
Yeah, we were calling Maloney
Ruben did it first. Ruben
Giorgia Meloni.
Yes, exactly.
Ruben opened his commentary with an Italian accent. So I mean, we couldn't resist.
Well, so my dad is Italian. My mom's Chinese. My dad is from Italy, and I just have a problem when you do this too much, because you're not always making a pizza pie. You know what I mean? You have to slow it down. And how are you is a nice way to do it, because it's like there's no H in Italian. So how are you? Would you like to go to my gulag? That kind of thing.
I mean, make it sound so cozy when you say it like
cozy.
that.
There is a pizza.
I want to go to the gulag.
Giorgia Meloni. Oh my God. I'm actually terrified. I'm really scared. And I definitely have relatives who voted for her. Definitely.
Sam, Green Dealer, thank you for continuously informing us about the most critical issues. Me and my mom watch your show every day, but wanted to know if you misspoke today. I'm sharing a link from the EPA website, which shows that over the last 120 years or more, the graph of number of hurricanes hasn't increased drastically. Intensity has. You mentioned frequency is also increasing. I mean, it's quite possible that the numbers haven't increased drastically, but intensity has. I would also argue that the number of so-called superstorms has increased in terms of frequency as well. The number of 100 years, once in a 100-year weather events increased. But yes, probably intensity is probably more dramatic than frequency when it comes to hurricanes. James Carvel Ice Cream. Should Dems open an investigation into Lizzo's desecration of American history in order to beat Republicans to the punch and show suburban swing voters they mean business?
New York Times pitch bot. Yes.
Right.
Well, James Carvel's ice cream is almost the same thing. Tomo Lo Fink. Happy Casual Friday, folks. More wild news from Britain. King Charles III gets his staff to iron his shoelaces, iron his bed sheets, iron his pajamas, runs his bath to a certain temperature with a plug in a certain position, among other things, according to a 2015 documentary, which featured interviews with some of Charles' former staff. I'm sure you'll agree. This is a very normal way to live. In more positive news, postal workers in Britain are on strike today. It would also be really funny if someone asked Jackson Hinkle which part of the Communist Manifesto says to sell gold investments with Ron Paul. That was recent sponsors.
Speaking of ANCAP, that reminds me of Ron Paul being. Do you guys watch the Anarchapulco documentary or the Anarchists on HBO?
No.
Excellent. Oh, you got to watch it anyway. But I don't know which thread to pick up on all that.